The New York Times told us it was Secretary Clinton who led the effort for that regime change. And this is the same type of mentality that supported the war in Iraq. Look, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein are brutal, murdering thugs. No debate about that. But what we have got to do, and what the president was saying, is we didn't think thoroughly about what happens the day after you get rid of these dictators. Regime change often has unintended consequences. In Iraq and in Libya right now, where ISIS has a very dangerous foothold. And I think if you study the whole history of American involvement in regime change, you see that quite often.
Secretary, we're going to let you respond.
Yeah, well, I would just point out that there was a vote in the Senate as to whether or not the United States should support the efforts by the Libyan people to protect themselves against the threats, the genocidal threats coming from Gaddafi, and whether we should go to the United Nations to seek Security Council support. Senator Sanders voted for that. And that's exactly what we did.
No,
we went to the United Nations. Yes, he did. We went to the United Nations Security Council. We got support from the Security Council, and we then supported the efforts of our European and Arab allies and partners. This was a request made to our government by the Europeans and by the Arabs because of their great fear of what chaos in Syria would do to them. And if you want to know what chaos does, not just to the people inside, but the people on the borders, look at Syria. Nobody stood up to Assad and removed him, and we have had a far greater disaster in Syria than we are currently dealing with right now.
Senator, go ahead.
Secretary Clinton made this charge in previous debates, and just repeating it doesn't make it true. What you were talking about is what I think was what they call the unanimous consent, you know what that is, where basically, do we support Libya moving to democracy? Well, you know what? I surely have always supported Libya moving to democracy. But please do not confuse that with your active effort for regime change without contemplating what happened the day after. Totally different issue.
Well,
Second of all, if I might, in terms of Syria.
Senator, let her respond to that, then we'll get to that. Go ahead, Secretary.
There was also in that a reference to the Security Council, and I know you're not shy when you oppose something, Senator, so yes, it was unanimous. That's exactly right, including you. And what we did was to try to provide support for our European and Arab allies and partners. The decision was the president's. Did I do the due diligence? Did I talk to everybody I could talk to? Did I visit every capital and then report back to the president? Yes, I did. That's what a Secretary of State does. But at the end of the day, those are the decisions that are made by the president to in any way use American military power. And the president made that decision. And yes, we did try, without success because of the Libyans' obstruction to our efforts. But we did try, and we will continue to try to help the Libyans.
Go ahead, Senator.
If you listen, 2 points. Number one, yes, 100-0 in the Senate voted for democracy in Libya, and I would vote for that again. But that is very different from getting actively involved to overthrow and bring about regime change without fully understanding what the consequence of that regime change would be. Second of all, I know you keep referring to Barack Obama all night here, but you in Syria talked about a no-fly zone.
That's right.
Which the president certainly does not support, nor do I support, because A, it will cost an enormous sum of money.
Yes, it will.
Second of all, it runs the risk of getting us sucked into perpetual warfare in that region. Thirdly, when we talk about Syria right now, no debate, like Gaddafi, like Saddam Hussein, Assad is another brutal, murdering dictator. But right now, our fight is to destroy ISIS first and to get rid of Assad second.
Well, I think Senator Sanders is just reinforce my point. Yes, when I was Secretary of State, I did urge, along with the Department of Defense and the CIA, that we seek out, vet, and train and arm Syrian opposition figures so that they could defend themselves against Assad. The president said no. Now, that's how it works. People who work for the president make recommendations, and then the president makes the decision. So I think it's only fair to look at where we are in Syria today. And yes, I do still support a no-fly zone because I think we need to put in safe havens for those poor Syrians who are fleeing both Assad and ISIS.
Let's stay
and
on
have
national
someplace
security.
that they can be safe.
Staying on national security, Dana Bash has a question.
Senator Sanders, in 1997, you said this about NATO. You said, quote, "It is not the time to continue wasting tens of billions of dollars helping to defend Europe, let alone assuming more than our share of any costs associated with expanding NATO." Do you still feel that way?
Well, I believe, if my memory is correct here, we spend about 75% of the entire cost of the military aspect of NATO. Given the fact that France has a very good healthcare system and free public education, college education for their people, the UK has a good national health service, and they also provide fairly reasonable higher education. You know what? Yeah, I do believe that the countries of Europe should pick up more of the burden for their defense. Yes, I do.
And just following up, Senator Sanders, Donald Trump also argues that NATO is unfair economically to the U.S. because America pays a disproportionate share. So how is what you say about NATO and your proposal different than his?
Well, you got to ask Trump. All I can tell you is with a huge deficit, with 47 million people living in poverty, with our inner cities collapsing, yeah, I do think countries like Germany and UK and France and European countries whose economy, or at least its standard of living and healthcare and education, they're doing pretty well. So I would not be embarrassed as President of the United States to say to our European allies, you know what? The United States of America cannot just support your economies. You've got to put up your own fair share of the defense burden. Nothing wrong with that.
Secretary Clinton.
I support our continuing involvement in NATO, and it is important to ask for our NATO allies to pay more of the cost. There is a requirement that they should be doing so, and I believe that needs to be enforced. But there's a larger question here. NATO has been the most successful military alliance in probably human history. It has bound together across the Atlantic countries that are democracies, that have many of the same values and interests. And now we need to modernize it and move it into the 21st century to serve as that head of our defense operations in Europe when it comes to terrorism and other threats that we face. So, yes, of course they should be paying more, but that doesn't mean if they don't, we leave, because I don't think that's in America's interest.
That's going to be part of my question to you is, to that point, there are 28 countries in the alliance, and the United States gives more money to NATO's budget than 21 of those countries combined. If they don't agree to pay more, as you suggested, then what would you do as Commander-in-Chief?
I will stay in NATO. I will stay in NATO, and we will continue to look for missions and other kinds of programs that they will support. Remember, NATO was with us in Afghanistan. Most of the member countries also lost soldiers and civilians in Afghanistan. They came to our rallying defense after 9/11. That meant a lot. And yes, we have to work out the financial aspects of it, but let's not forget what's really happening. With Russia being more aggressive, making all kinds of intimidating moves toward the Baltic countries. We've seen what they've done in eastern Ukraine. We know how they want to rewrite the map of Europe. It is not in our interest. Think of how much it would cost if Russia's aggression were not deterred because NATO was there on the front lines, making it clear
Thank you,
they could not move forward.
Senator, let's talk about the U.S. relationship with Israel. Senator Sanders, you maintain that Israel's response in Gaza in 2014 was, quote, disproportionate and led to the unnecessary loss of innocent life. What do you say to those who believe that Israel has a right to defend itself as it sees fit?
Well, as somebody who spent many months of my life when I was a kid in Israel, who has family in Israel, of course Israel has a right not only to defend themselves, but to live in peace and security without fear of terrorist attack. That is not a debate. But what you just read, yeah, I do believe that. Israel was subjected to terrorist attacks, has every right in the world to destroy terrorism. But we had in the Gaza area, not a very large area, some 10,000 civilians who were wounded and some 1,500 who were killed. Now, if you're asking me, not just me, but countries all over the world, was that a disproportionate attack? The answer is, I believe it was. And let me say something else. As somebody who is 100% pro-Israel, in the long run, and this is not going to be easy, God only knows, but in the long run, if we are ever going to bring peace to that region which has seen so much hatred and so much war, we are going to have to treat the Palestinian people with respect and dignity. So what is not to say that right now in Gaza, unemployment is somewhere around 40%. You got a lot of that area continuous. It hasn't been rebuilt. Decimated. Houses decimated. Healthcare decimated. Schools decimated. I believe the United States and the rest of the world have got to work together to help the Palestinian people. That does not make me anti-Israel. That paves the way, I think.
Thank you, sir.
For an approach that works in the Middle East.
Thank you. Secretary Clinton, do you agree with Senator Sanders that Israel overreacts to Palestinian attacks and that in order for there to be peace between Israel and the Palestinians, Israel must, quote, end its disproportionate responses?
I negotiated the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in November of 2012. I did it in concert with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, based in Ramallah. I did it with the then Muslim Brotherhood President, Morsi, based in Cairo, working closely with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli cabinet. I can tell you right now, because I have been there with Israeli officials going back more than 25 years, that they do not seek this kind of attacks. They do not invite rockets raining down on their towns and villages. They do not believe that there should be a constant incitement by Hamas, aided and abetted by Iran, against Israel. And so when it came time, after they had taken the incoming rockets, taken the assaults and ambushes on their soldiers, and they called and told me, I was in Cambodia, that they were getting ready to have to invade Gaza again because they couldn't find anybody to talk to tell them to stop it. I flew all night. I got there. I negotiated that. So I don't know how you run a country when you are under constant threat, terrorist attack, rockets coming at you. You have a right to defend yourself. That does not mean that you don't take appropriate precautions. And I understand that there's always second guessing anytime there is a war. It also does not mean that we should not continue to do everything we can to try to reach a two-state solution, which would give the Palestinians the rights, and just let me finish, the rights and the autonomy that they deserve. And let me say this, if Yasser Arafat had agreed with my husband at Camp David in the late 1990s to the offer that Prime Minister Barack put on the table, we would have had a